I never imagined my 66th birthday would begin with me committing a small crime against a lock that had outlived its promises. Rain hammered the tin roof of the warehouse like 1,000 coins hurled by God, and the Mississippi breathed its damp iron breath through the gaps between warped boards. The key David left me, my husband of 43 years, now reduced to paper and past tense, chattered against the brass like teeth in a fever. Behind my ribs, my heart beat the way a trapped sparrow does. Frantic, soft, refusing to stop. "You're nothing, Mom. A useless old woman. What would you even do with a real inheritance?" Lucas's voice still clung to me like smoke. Those words had turned our penthouse elevator into a sinking cage and the curb outside into exile. He handed me my suitcase and didn't meet my eyes. He didn't have to. The will had already rearranged the furniture of our lives. He, the penthouse in Atlanta, the portfolios everyone applauds at cocktail parties. Me, a line of print no one could say, without wincing, the property at 31 Dauphine Wharf, the boathouse and its contents. If this story grips you already, leave a comment, tap like, and subscribe to see how far a woman can fall and what she finds when she hits the riverbed. Now watch with me. The padlock surrendered with a shriek, a dead bird's last note. I pressed my shoulder into the door. The heavy slab swung inward and exhaled rot, motor oil, and old sawdust. That particular perfume of men who worked with their hands and believed silence was a kind of prayer. I raised the flashlight. A silver blade cut the dark. My knees almost forgot their job. The beam touched curved metal under a fitted cover. Then another. Then another 3 low mounds arranged with the reverence of a chapel. The rest of the space wasn't ruin at all. What I'd taken for decay from the street was camouflage. Inside, the bones were new sealed concrete floor, discrete vents breathing climate control, motion sensors like sleepy stars along the rafters, racks labeled in a hand I knew as well as my own. David had always written with a fountain pen, blue-black ink that dried as if it were deciding, not obeying. I stepped in. Rain thundered approval. Somewhere beyond the wall, a ship's horn mourned its own enormity. The flashlight found a switch. My thumb hesitated, some childish superstition that turning on the light would scare away the magic. I flipped it anyway. LEDs bloomed overhead, cold and clean. The tarps took on a gentle sheen. The warehouse revealed more of itself. A small glassed office raised like a lifeguard's chair, a bathroom door with a shiny lock, a tool wall arranged with a geometry that made my eyes sting. David had said he loved order because it was the one thing death couldn't rearrange. He was wrong, of course, death rearranges everything. But here, strangely, he had set order like a trap for grief. "Okay," I whispered, ridiculous and alone. "Show me." The first tarp peeled back like winter from a field. Steel gray paint surfaced, liquid even under dust. The badge on the snub nose sent a shock through me. Ferrari 250 GT Lusso, 1960, the exact model that had once made David slow a museum video 3 times in a row, murmuring something about proportion and restraint. The light slid over chrome, over wire wheels like spun frost. There was a leather folio on a stand by the bumper, embossed with a discreet F. Inside, provenance, inspection reports, photographs where my husband stood beside the car and managed, even camera-shy, to look quietly in love. "David," I said to the empty air, equal parts indictment and thanks. "What did you do?" The second tarp fell to the floor and my breath broke again. Jaguar E-Type Series, 1960. 1. Long bonnet like a promise. British racing green so deep it ate light and gave back patience. In the angled reflection, I saw the ghost of my face, a woman who hadn't learned new cities in decades, suddenly learning to stand inside one. The third revealed a Porsche 356 amperes Speedster, 1957, its red as poised as a tide at noon. It was smaller than the others, which made it feel more dangerous. I imagined it slipping through New Orleans streets at dawn, the river on the left, coffee on the right, the present tolerable for 10 minutes at a time. I swallowed against a pressure I couldn't name. Relief? Horror? Both are cousins who arrive uninvited. Along the far wall, under plexiglass, hung files labeled with dates 6 years' worth, and names I didn't recognize. Below them, a metal cabinet with a combination lock. Above the cabinet, a framed photo I recognized immediately. Not us, not family, but a Kyoto alleyway watercolor we'd bought from a street artist on our 35th anniversary trip, when the rain was cherry petal soft and David made a joke about getting lost on purpose. The frame didn't belong here. The frame was a sign. I looked for a letter the way a dog looks for its master. It was taped next to the light switch, where my hand had been moments earlier. Cream envelope. My name Evelyn written like he always wrote it, as if the Y were the only dangerous letter in the alphabet. I slid my thumb under the flap. Even through the storm, I heard the unsealing. My Evelyn, the first line said, and my spine remembered everything it had been asked to forget these last 3 weeks. If you are reading this, I have left you the ugliest building I could find and the most beautiful contents I could manage. Forgive me for the theatrics. They were necessary. So is what comes next. I sat on an overturned crate. The light made the paper bright as bone. 6 years ago, the cardiologist said the numbers he could say without looking away. I decided if I could not add years, I would add shelter. Not the kind our son can leverage, not the kind men in nice suits can shepherd into funds and then call you at dinner to explain. Tangible shelter, beautiful shelter. Shelter that is wealth, yes, but also witness. If I told you then, you would have comforted me out of it. If I told Lucas, he would have managed it out of you. I stopped. The river breathed. Somewhere outside, tires hissed, then faded. You know I believe in tests the way sailors believe in lighthouses. They do not move the rocks. They only stop you from proving you are stronger than granite. This will is a lighthouse. He will see what he wants to see, and so will you. I looked up at the cars, these impossible animals tamed by my husband's patience. My stomach hurt. Rain stitched the roof tighter. The folios hold valuations, do not faint. You will need the oxygen, but the numbers are not the point. The point is sovereignty. There is more in the metal cabinet. Combination is our Kyoto date. Month first Americans deserve one small victory. You will find a trust portfolio and a deed to a cottage in Asheville, the one with the screened porch you liked on that Blue Ridge Drive when the newspaper was full of other people's tragedies and you said, "Imagine if peace were a place." I tried. I tried to build you one. My face stung without warning. I didn't realize I was crying until the ink began to blur. You will also find a small velvet pouch. That is selfish. I wanted to give it to you on our 45th. Forgive me for assigning the task to the future. There is a sealed letter for Lucas, labeled, "Deliver only if he is ready." You will know. You always have. Do not let anyone hurry you. Alistair Finch will help with the cars. His card is in the folio. The warehouse is on a maintenance schedule for 5 years. I disguised the outside for a reason. You are safe here. But please, Evie, do not sleep here long. Go where the light is kinder. Go where your name doesn't echo in hallways that forgot how to hold us. Love is not a trap door. It is a bridge. Walk it. D. The page trembled. I was trembling. I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope as if it could fold me in return. The sound in my chest changed. Not the trapped bird, something larger. Something deciding to live. I crossed to the framed Kyoto alley and lifted it off its hook. The wall hid a metal panel I hadn't seen a neat square flush with the studs. Combination dial. I wiped my palm on my dress and spun the numbers. Month, day, year. The soft click had the intimacy of a secret finally relieved to be known. Inside, order thin binders. labeled with trust names I had never heard, printouts with cautious fonts, a deed embossed with Buncombe County, North Carolina. The cottage address was inked in David's hand below the typed line, as if the law needed his handwriting to be real. There were USB drives, each labeled. There was the velvet pouch, small, satin, slick, the weight of a ring or a prayer. I did not open it, not yet. Some doors are kinder closed for one more hour. The sound in the rafters changed a ping from the motion system. I glanced at the sensor panel mounted near the office. Disarmed. A tiny red dot beside a tiny word. Bypass. My skin prickled. Of course you did, I said to the memory of the man who had tried to protect me from my own goodness. If I'd discovered this in the first week untethered, desperate, I might have come here like a pilgrim and never left. He had made it possible to find. He had also made it hard to misunderstand. I rearmed the system. The green dot glowed reedy. The storm outside started to spend itself in long, exhausted breaths. The warehouse smelled less like rot and more like warm metal cooling down. I stood in the aisle between the cars and touched each hood with the back of my fingers, the way my mother had taught me to test a child's forehead for fever. The Ferrari felt like a decision. The Jaguar felt like a secret I would eventually forgive myself for keeping. The Porsche felt like laughter I didn't know how to have yet. My phone buzzed. Lucas. I watched his name pulse on black glass until it stopped. Then I powered the phone down and let the river have the last word. There is a moment, after a storm bellies out its last thunder, when the city forgets how to be loud. I closed the safe. I rehung Kyoto. I turned off the overheads and left one office lamp glowing so the darkness wouldn't muscle back all at once. I locked the door from the inside, slid the bar home, and sat in the glassed office long enough to drink 2 fingers of water from a dusty bottle and tell myself 3 true things. I am not homeless. I am not helpless. And I am not done. When I finally stepped back into New Orleans, the rain had thinned to lace. The river was the color of secrets told by people who wished they were better. I tucked David's letter under my blouse like a reliquary and walked to my old Toyota, the one Lucas had mocked last Thanksgiving because it didn't announce anything about anyone. The engine turned over like a promise made in private. Okay, I told the road, the river, the city that had hidden my future in plain sight. Okay. The day of the will reading had been sweltering, the kind of New Orleans heat that seemed to crawl inside your lungs and make even breathing a negotiation. I remember smoothing the black dress I had worn to David's funeral just 3 weeks earlier, fabric heavy with grief and sweat. Beside me, Lucas sat in his perfect navy suit, the tie knotted with surgical precision, his gaze already distant as if the reading were nothing more than a formality he'd rehearsed in his mind 100 times. We waited in the oak-paneled office of Rosa Delgado, the Hart family attorney for decades. Rosa had been our quiet constant, the woman who notarized mortgages, mediated disputes over zoning, and counseled us through the legalities of marriage and death. But that afternoon, her hands fidgeted on the manila folder, as if the papers inside might burn her fingers. "Before we begin," she said at last, adjusting her glasses, "I want to assure you that everything is legally binding and reflects exactly what Mr. Hart instructed." The words should have been a comfort. Instead, they landed like a warning shot. She read in a voice deliberately calm, but I only half heard the first allocations. Smaller accounts to distant relatives, charitable bequests to the Historical Society, even a provision for the preservation of the church bell David had loved. But then Rosa's eyes flicked up, locking on Lucas. "To my son, Lucas Hart, I leave the penthouse residence in Atlanta and the primary investment portfolio managed under my name." Lucas's jaw set in what he must have thought was dignity, but I saw the flicker of triumph in his eyes. The crown had landed on his head, just as he expected. "And to my wife, Evelyn Hart," Rosa continued, her tone lowering, "I leave the property at 31 Dauphine Wharf in New Orleans, the boathouse and its contents." The silence afterward was thunderous. "A boathouse?" I managed, my voice so small I almost didn't recognize it. That's all? Rosa swallowed. It is what your husband instructed. Lucas shifted in his chair. His hand landed on my shoulder, the pressure slightly too tight. He bent close, breath scented faintly of peppermint. Don't worry, Mom. I'll take care of you. The words dripped with benevolence, but his fingers pinched like claws. I stared at him, too stunned to form a response. 43 years of marriage, and David had left me a warehouse on the river, while our only son walked away with the life we'd built together. The meeting dissolved into signatures and murmured condolences. Rosa avoided my gaze, as though she too knew something I didn't. Hours later, Lucas drove me back to Atlanta. Our penthouse loomed like a stranger's house when we arrived. My suitcase sat waiting in the entryway, already packed. I think it's best if you find somewhere else to stay, Lucas said, voice clipped, efficient. My heart stuttered. What do you mean? This has been my home for 15 years. It's mine now. Dad was clear in the will. He didn't even look at me as he adjusted his cufflinks. I'm meeting colleagues tomorrow to convert his study into my office. I need the space ready. Panic clawed up my throat. But where am I supposed to go? At least give me time. There's always the boathouse he left you. Lucas interrupted, his smile thin and cruel. Maybe you can open a repair shop at your age. Or, he laughed, a sharp foreign sound, you can just sit in it and collect dust. Seems fitting. I gripped the back of a chair to keep from collapsing. Lucas, I whispered, this is still my home. Your father and I, it's not your home anymore, he snapped. His eyes were steel. It's mine. Dad made that perfectly clear. He shoved the suitcase against my legs, forcing me backward. My son, the boy I had once rocked through fevers, now hurting me like refuse. And then he said it, the words that have carved themselves into my marrow. You're nothing, Mom. A useless old woman. What would you even do with a real inheritance? Dad knew better. The cruelty struck harder than any slap. It was as if the floor beneath me disintegrated, leaving only air. I couldn't answer. My throat had sealed itself against sound, so I picked up my suitcase, clutched the unfamiliar key Rosa had pressed into my palm after the reading, and walked out. Hours later, I was parked beside a shuttered warehouse by the river, rain stuttering on the windshield, clutching that key like it was the last thread tying me to the life I had known. And so my birthday ended in exile. But the warehouse door was opening, and with it, a secret David had hidden even from me. The first tarp slid to the concrete with a whisper, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. The silver curves of the Ferrari 250 GT Lusso glowed under my flashlight like liquid moonlight, every line exact, every chrome detail polished to a mirrored finish. I knew nothing of car collecting beyond the basics, but even I understood this was not an ordinary machine. It was a relic, a crown jewel, the kind of artifact men argued over in hushed auctions. David had once paused a television documentary on Ferraris, his finger grazing the screen as though he could feel the metal. One of the most beautiful cars ever built, he had murmured, but I had never imagined he had one hidden away. My knees nearly gave out. I staggered backward, bumping into the second mound. Hands shaking, I pulled that cover free, Jaguar E-Type Series 1961. Its dark green paint seemed to drink the light, the long, elegant nose, a promise of speed that made my pulse quicken. David's favorite novels had always been the British spy thrillers, heroes roaring down country roads in cars like this. Had he dreamed of being that man, even while living the life of a steady husband and father? Tears blurred my sight. What else had I missed about the man I'd shared decades with? The third tarp came away slowly, reverently. Porsche 356 amperes. Speedster 1957. Small, poised, painted in a red so rich it recalled the wine David used to order for our anniversaries. It looked almost playful compared to the others, less aristocratic, more rebellious, like it wanted to be driven fast along a coastal road with the wind tearing at your hair. I dropped the cover to the floor and stood among them, 3 silent witnesses to a secret life my husband had never spoken of. And then I noticed the stands. Each car had a leather folio propped beside it, embossed with a subtle monogram, D.H. Inside the first, I found laminated documents, inspection records, provenance certificates with embossed seals, and photographs of David himself, standing beside the vehicles at auctions or storage facilities. His expression was soft, almost boyish, the same expression he had worn on our honeymoon when he first saw the ocean. My throat closed. For 43 years, I thought I had known every part of him, but here was proof that he had been building something quietly, deliberately, out of sight, even from me. I turned toward the far wall and saw the small glass office raised above the warehouse floor. Its lamp cast a dim amber glow. On the inside wall, taped neatly beside the light switch, was the envelope I had already opened, but I hadn't read it all. My fingers fumbled, pulling it free again. Alastair Finch, the next page instructed. Dealer, confidant, and friend. He knows everything about these acquisitions. Trust him. His card is in the Jaguar folio. Call him when you are ready. A neat business card had been tucked inside, the kind printed on thick ivory stock. Alastair J. Finch. Private Acquisitions, Charleston, SC. Below that, David's script continued. Do not show Lucas. Not yet. He is being tested, Evelyn, though he does not know it. If he proves compassion, if he proves wisdom, then share this legacy. If not, it is yours alone. You will understand when the time comes. I dropped into the desk chair, the paper trembling in my hands. Tested. Lucas was being tested. My son, who had just turned me out of my own home, was being measured by the will of a father who must have suspected the rot in his character long before I allowed myself to see it. The storm outside had slowed to a drizzle, the rain dripping from the gutters like the aftershocks of grief. The warehouse felt alive around me. The hum of hidden vents, the faint tick of cooling engines that had not been started in years but seemed to remember fire. And in the quiet, the truth began to dawn. David had not abandoned me. He had not reduced me to a boathouse as an afterthought. He had given me something greater: independence, protection, sovereignty. Lucas might believe he had won the inheritance game, but the real wealth was here, disguised as neglect. I rose, pulling the covers carefully back over the cars as though tucking children into bed. My hands stopped shaking. There was more to discover: the cabinet under the Kyoto painting, the safe, the velvet pouch, but not tonight. Tonight, I had seen enough to know I wasn't broken, and I wasn't done. As I turned off the lights and locked the door behind me, I whispered into the humid dark, "You were clever, David. Cleverer than any of us knew." The Mississippi sighed in answer, and for the first time since the funeral, I let myself believe there might still be a future waiting to be claimed. The following morning, I returned to the boathouse with my palms slick against the steering wheel, as though the building itself might reject me. But the lock turned obediently, and inside, the air smelled of cold steel and polish instead of rot. The storm had passed. Morning sunlight bled through high windows, striking dust motes like gold. I stood again among the cars, their tarps drawn tight, and forced myself to confront the thing David had hidden most carefully: the safe behind the Kyoto painting. It seemed almost absurd. That watercolor had hung in our living room for years, its alleyway rendered in damp strokes of blue and rose. After one move, David claimed it had been lost. I'd been disappointed but hardly devastated. Yet here it was, hung precisely, guarding something far heavier than paper and paint. I lifted it from its hook. The frame came free, exposing the square panel flush with the wall. My fingers trembled against the cool metal dial. David's instructions came back to me in his steady script. Kyoto date. Month 1st. For once, let the Americans win. I spun the numbers, holding my breath, listening for that delicate click of surrender. And when it came, I felt the air shift as though a door had opened inside my chest as well as the wall. The safe swung outward. Inside was not chaos, not clutter, but order so deliberate it bordered on reverence. Thin binders, each labeled with trust names I had never seen before. Hart Holdings East, Blue Mountain Trust, Carolina Properties LLC. USB drives sat neatly stacked, their labels handwritten in David's careful blue-black ink. A leather portfolio bore the title Estate of David Hart, Private Asset Inventory for Evelyn Hart. And there, tucked into the corner, was a small velvet pouch, its drawstring cinched. The weight of it fit in my palm, heavy for its size. My intuition whispered it held a ring. I couldn't bring myself to open it. Not yet. I set it aside gently and reached for the portfolio. The first page alone nearly knocked the breath from me. Apartment buildings in Charlotte, a commercial block in Charleston, stock portfolios, bonds, a vineyard in North Carolina foothills. Column after column of numbers stretched across the pages, culminating in a total that made my ears ring. Tens of millions. I lowered the papers, blinking against the shock. This was not some secret hobby, not even just a hidden collection. David had built an empire in the shadows, piece by careful piece, while I sat across from him at dinner, unaware of the scale of his design. My throat tightened. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered. "Why did you carry this burden alone?" The answer waited in the next sheaf of papers, a deed to a cottage in Asheville, North Carolina. I recognized the name of the street. We had driven through once, years ago, when the mountains were draped in autumn fire. I'd pointed out a little clapboard house with a screened porch overlooking the valley and said, "Imagine if peace could be a place." David had listened. He had remembered. And he had bought it. 4 years ago. Fully furnished. Ready. My knees gave way, and I sat cross-legged on the polished floor like a child among gifts too great to comprehend. And then I saw the other envelope. White, sealed, heavy. On the front, to Lucas. Deliver only if he is ready. The sight of my son's name, written in David's script, cut deeper than any inheritance division could. Because I knew immediately what David had done. He had left the decision to me. He had trusted me to determine when, if ever, Lucas would be ready to face the truth. I cradled the envelope in both hands, my tears falling on the flap. Lucas's words from the night before echoed, "You're nothing, a useless old woman." Yet here I was, holding the proof that David believed in me enough to entrust our son's moral test to my judgment. The weight of that responsibility was heavier than gold. I replaced the envelope carefully, locked the safe, and hung Kyoto back on its hook. The room felt warmer somehow, as if the cars themselves exhaled approval. In that moment I understood. David hadn't left me scraps. He had left me sovereignty. And sovereignty comes with choices. But Lucas would never see that, not yet. Not until he proved he was ready. The following day, I dialed the number from the Jaguar folio, the one written in David's steady hand, Alastair Finch. My finger hovered over the last digit before pressing it, as though the call might change everything. He answered on the second ring, his voice deep, deliberate, touched with the faint lilt of Charleston. "Mrs. Hart, I was expecting you." For a moment, I couldn't speak. "You knew?" I finally whispered. "Mr. Hart told me you would find your way eventually," he replied gently, "and that you might feel adrift when you did. I'm here to help you, in whatever capacity you decide." 2 hours later, a modest sedan pulled up beside my weather-beaten Toyota. No ostentation, no sign of the wealth this man must swim in daily. Alastair stepped out, tall and silver-haired, his jacket tweed, his shoes polished but not new. He carried a leather portfolio slim enough to mean business, wide enough to mean answers. Inside the boathouse, his gaze softened as he swept it over the vehicles. "He did well," Alastair murmured. "Very well. These 3 alone could anchor any collection in Europe. kept in climate control, meticulously maintained, and the documentation. He tapped the folios with a reverence. I recognized the reverence of men who know the difference between a trinket and a treasure. I folded my arms, suddenly defensive. Why didn't he tell me? 43 years of marriage, and I knew nothing of this. Alistair's eyes warmed with something like pity. Because he was protecting it for you, Mrs. Hart. Protecting you. In my experience, secrecy in matters of wealth rarely comes from malice. More often, it comes from fear. Fear that revelation will bring ruin too early. I turned away, staring at the Jaguar's long hood, the green paint gleaming like deep water. He was afraid of Lucas, I said quietly. Alistair didn't argue. He didn't need to. Instead, he opened his portfolio and laid out neat valuations. The Ferrari worth nearly 10 million, the Jaguar perhaps 2, the Porsche another 1.5 million. My pulse faltered just seeing the numbers, zeros stretching into the impossible. These are not cars, Alistair said softly. They are currency, heritage, and power. Mr. Hart structured everything with extraordinary foresight. He anticipated your son's entitlement. He anticipated his reaction. And he built this. He gestured to the polished floor, the humming vents, the safe behind Kyoto as your shield. I pressed my palm to the cold steel of the safe door, and now I'm expected to wield it. Alistair studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded. You'll do so with more grace than you realize. He walked me through the maintenance contracts David had prepaid, the discreet insurance policies, the security systems designed to appear old but in truth state-of-the-art. Then he paused, frowning slightly at the control panel. These motion sensors, he said, tapping the small console. They were disabled. Recently. I froze. What do you mean? The bypass code was entered within the past week. He looked at me gravely. Did you come here before last night? I shook my head, the chill in my chest spreading. Alistair's mouth tightened. Then someone else has been here. Perhaps only curious. Perhaps more. The warehouse suddenly felt less like sanctuary and more like a stage with unseen eyes watching. My hand instinctively brushed the letter folded in my blouse, as if David's words might shield me still. Alistair rearmed the system, setting the green light to ready. I'll have the codes changed, he assured me, and I'll arrange for quiet surveillance, nothing conspicuous, just enough to keep prowlers honest. I wanted to protest, wanted to believe this sanctuary was untouchable, but a deeper instinct told me David had known even this, that the dangers wouldn't end with his passing, but might only begin. Thank you, I whispered. Alistair packed his papers and prepared to leave, promising to return whenever I wished. For now, he said at the door, don't rush decisions. Let the knowledge settle in you. Wealth without preparation is a burden. Let it become your strength instead. When he drove away, the silence pressed in. I looked around at the gleaming machines, the meticulous order, the hidden safe. A fortress disguised as ruin. Yet a fortress could become a prison if I lingered too long. That evening, I opened the deed to the Asheville cottage again. A photo clipped to it showed a stone path winding to a screened porch, Blue Ridge Mountains rolling in the distance. My breath caught the exact scene I had once called peace. David had listened. He had remembered, and he had built it for me. I pressed the photo to my chest. The warehouse might hold treasures, but I could not live among ghosts and steel. Not for long. The mountains were calling. The road to Asheville twisted through pines and low mist, each mile lifting a little of the weight I'd carried since Atlanta. I had left the warehouse locked and secured, Alistair's new codes humming on the console, the 3 cars slumbering under their covers like sacred beasts. Driving north, I felt as if I were leaving a fortress of secrets and entering something softer, something David had meant as a true beginning. The cottage sat at the end of a quiet lane framed by maples just beginning to flame into red. It wasn't grand or ostentatious, no penthouse glass or marble. Instead, it was humble stone, weathered shutters, a screened porch with wicker chairs that seemed to be waiting for me. I parked at the gate and just sat for a moment, staring through the windshield. David had chosen this. For me, I carried my suitcase up the flagstone path. The garden was tidy but alive with color, late roses climbing a trellis, lavender nodding in the breeze. The key turned smoothly in the Dutch door, and when I pushed it open, the air smelled faintly of cedar and lemon polish. Inside, sunlight spilled across polished hardwood floors. A small living room opened before me, warm with built-in bookshelves and a stone fireplace. On the mantel sat a framed watercolor of the Venice Canal where David had once knelt, clumsy and earnest, to propose. I pressed my hand to my lips, shaking. Everywhere I looked, details waited for me. A navy throw folded on the sofa, the exact shade I loved. Kitchen cabinets stocked with simple dishes I recognized from catalogs I'd circled but never bought. In the bedroom, a quilt stitched in soft blues and creams, the very pattern I'd admired in a boutique window years ago. David hadn't just bought a house. He had woven me into it. I sank onto the window seat, staring out at the view. Ridges layered in smoky blue, the valley below bathed in autumn light. For the first time since the funeral, I felt my lungs fill completely. A knock startled me. When I opened the door, a woman stood there, tall, silver hair swept into a bun, her eyes bright behind glasses. She held a covered dish balanced in her hands. "You must be Evelyn," she said warmly. "I'm Elena Pike. I live 2 doors down. David asked me to look out for you when you came." The world tilted. "You knew my husband?" She nodded. "He visited a few times. Quiet man, but deliberate. Said this house was his secret project, and that when his wife arrived, she might need a friend." Elena smiled, extending the dish. "It's just chicken casserole, nothing fancy. But I thought you wouldn't want to cook your first night." Tears blurred my eyes as I accepted the dish. "Thank you," I whispered. "Please, come in." We sat at the small kitchen table with tea steaming between us, the casserole warming in the oven. Elena told me she had been a literature professor before retiring, that she'd lost her husband a decade ago. "It gets different, not easier," she said gently. "Having neighbors helps. Having purpose helps more." I listened, grateful for the cadence of her voice, the simple humanity of her presence. It felt as though David had arranged even this, ensuring I would not be entirely alone when I stepped into this new life. After she left, promising to return tomorrow with introductions to other neighbors, I wandered through the cottage again, slower this time. In the study, a small writing desk sat beneath the window. In the drawer, I found a folder labeled in David's hand, "For Evelyn." Inside were practical things, lists of local doctors, phone numbers for service providers, even a library card already registered in my name. At the back of the folder, a note dated just 3 months before his death. "My dearest Evelyn, if you're reading this, you've found your way to Asheville. I wish I could sit beside you now, watch the light change on the ridges. But since I cannot, I want this place to be my gift. Not an obligation, not a monument, but a sanctuary. Use it as you will sell it, rent it, or stay forever. My only wish is that you find peace within its walls." I pressed the paper to my chest. For the first time in weeks, I did not cry out of despair, but out of something closer to gratitude. That night I slept in the cottage's small bedroom, lulled by the quiet tick of a grandfather clock in the hall and the faint rustle of wind through trees. The mountains held me gently, and for once I dreamed not of loss but of possibility. It didn't take long for Lucas to find me. Barely a week after I had settled into the Asheville cottage long enough to begin believing it might truly be mine, his black SUV rolled up the gravel lane. I saw it from the kitchen window, tires crunching, his silhouette taut in the driver's seat like a storm-given flesh. My stomach sank. He had hired someone. A private investigator, no doubt. By the time I opened the door, Lucas was already striding up the path, his expression a mix of triumph and accusation. "So this is where you've been hiding," he said, his voice dripping with disdain as he glanced at the stone porch, the flower beds, the neat curtains. Not exactly a boathouse, is it? I kept my hand on the doorframe, steadying myself. Hello, Lucas. This is a surprise. A surprise? He gave a humorless laugh. Imagine mine when I dug a little and discovered Dad had tucked away a mountain cottage for you. Quite a step up from that rusted warehouse, don't you think? I folded my arms. Your father made his decisions for reasons you may not understand. His eyes narrowed. Oh, I understand. He didn't trust me. He thought you deserved more than me. And he hid it, because he knew I'd contest it. I shook my head, grief and anger knotting inside me. It isn't about deserving. It's about protection. Protection from what? From me? He barked the words, his face hardening. You think I don't know what's in that warehouse, Mom? You think I didn't go there? The blood drained from my face. I looked through the windows, he continued, leaning forward. Saw the cars under those covers. Vintage, rare, and don't bother pretending they're worthless. I made a few calls. Those things are worth more than the penthouse. Maybe more than everything Dad supposedly left me. His words clanged in the quiet mountain air, the weight of them undeniable. I tried to compose myself. Lucas, the penthouse and portfolio are significant. More than most people will ever have. He sneered. The penthouse? Do you know how much it's bleeding me in repairs already? Taxes, maintenance. Dad handed me an anchor disguised as a crown. Meanwhile, you're sitting on millions in cars and God knows what else. How is that fair? I steadied my breath. Your father's letter explained his choices. Lucas's eyebrows shot up. A letter? You've been keeping that from me too? It was addressed to me, I said firmly. And given how you treated me after the will reading, calling me useless, throwing me out of my home, I wasn't eager to share something so personal. He had the decency to flinch, just slightly, but his anger swallowed it quickly. Let me see it. I hesitated, then reached for the copy I had made from the safe, the one David had clearly meant me to guard. I handed it to him across the threshold, my hand lingering until he tugged it free. Lucas read in silence, his face shifting like storm clouds, disbelief, then indignation, then something darker as he reached the passages where David described his fears about Lucas's character, about control, about compassion eroded by ambition. When he finished, he set the paper down with deliberate care. His voice was low, dangerous. So that's it. Dad didn't trust me. Thought I'd squander it all, so he left me the scraps and handed you the empire. I shook my head. He left you the visible inheritance, the name, the status. He left me protection. That was his choice. Lucas's jaw clenched. I should contest this. I should drag all of it into court. You won't win, I said softly, meeting his gaze. David structured everything too carefully. The trusts are airtight. The deeds are clean. You'd only burn money fighting what you can't undo. For a moment, he looked at me, really looked at me as though trying to find the mother who had once bent over his crib, the woman who had defended him from every childhood slight. But that flicker passed. His face hardened again. This isn't over, he said, turning sharply, not by a long shot. His SUV roared down the lane, gravel spitting from the tires. I watched him disappear between the trees, my hands trembling not from fear but from a clarity that felt like steel sliding into place. David had been right. Lucas was being tested, and for now, he was failing. The days after Lucas's visit were restless. The cottage felt safe, yes, but my sleep was shallow, my dreams fractured by echoes of his voice. The letter David had left burned in my mind, the line about Lucas being tested. I found myself replaying it whenever silence grew too heavy. Then, one afternoon, a knock rattled the door again. I opened it to find a young woman in a smart gray suit, hair pulled back too tightly, exhaustion hiding beneath her careful poise. Mrs. Hart? I'm Julia Crane. I work for your son. I stiffened. For Lucas? Yes, she said quickly. His assistant. He asked me to come. She hesitated, then her voice softened. But I'll be honest, I came because I thought you should know the truth. I motioned her inside, wary but curious. She perched on the edge of my sofa, clutching her leather portfolio. Your son is in trouble, Julia said plainly. Financial trouble. The penthouse renovations spiraled structural issues, contractors threatening liens. And his latest development project collapsed after environmental regulators intervened. He's leveraged himself heavily, and without liquidity, foreclosure is a real possibility. I folded my hands tightly in my lap. So he sent you to ask for money? Her eyes flicked away. He didn't phrase it like that, but yes, he believes you have resources, more than you've admitted. I stared out the window at the mist weaving through the trees. Lucas has received more than most men his age ever will. Yet he cannot see past what he wasn't given. Julia's voice dropped, careful. He isn't sleeping, Mrs. Hart. He's unraveling. And when men in power unravel, they lash out. I thought you should be aware. I thanked her for her honesty and saw her out, my mind already racing. That night, the boathouse's security system pinged my phone. A movement alert. My blood ran cold. I called Alistair at once. He answered as if he'd been awake, voice sharp. Stay where you are. I'll handle it. Hours later, his call came back. Someone tried the side door. Didn't get in. Motion lights scared them off. Likely just a prowler, or someone curious. But with your son sniffing around, I won't discount deliberate intent. I pressed the phone to my ear, shivering despite the blanket over my shoulders. It was him, wasn't it? I can't say, Alistair replied carefully. But we'll upgrade everything. Silent alarms, new codes, cameras that feed directly to me. The cars will remain secure. When I ended the call, I sat in the dark living room, listening to the grandfather clock tick steady as a heart. David had built me fortresses, yes, steel, trust, mountains, but none of them could protect me from the truth that my own son might soon turn from threat to enemy. The night pressed against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called once, sharp as a warning. I whispered into the quiet, David, what do I do with him? But the mountains gave no answer. I drove back to Atlanta a week later, unable to ignore the gnawing unease Julia's warning had planted in me. The penthouse, once my sanctuary of glass and light, loomed over Peachtree Street like a monument stripped of memory. The doorman recognized me, his expression caught between pity and surprise, but let me pass without question. The elevator ride felt endless, each floor chiming like an accusation. When the doors slid open, my heart sank. The penthouse was gutted. Bare studs gaped where walls had been. Wires dangled like veins. Piles of marble slabs leaned precariously against half-framed doorways. A fine gray dust hung in the air, coating everything, including the memories I'd once kept here. The home David and I had built together was now a skeletal ruin. Footsteps echoed from the back. Lucas appeared, dressed in expensive jeans and a designer shirt, but his face was drawn, pale beneath a forced smirk. Mom, he said, as though my arrival were an inconvenience. Didn't expect you. I needed to see it for myself, I answered, my voice low. Julia came to me. He stiffened. Julia had no right. She told me the truth. I cut in, gesturing to the wreckage. This is what you've done with your inheritance? His jaw flexed. It's an investment. Once the renovations are complete, the place will triple in value. It's strategy, Mom, something you wouldn't understand. I stepped closer, brushing dust from a marble countertop abandoned on the floor. Do you know what this looks like to me? Destruction. A monument to your pride. His laugh was hollow. You think you're better? Sitting on a pile of cars you didn't even know existed until Dad handed them to you? I stared at him, grief like iron in my chest. You think the cars are the point? Lucas, your father tried to prepare you. He even commissioned reports about this building years ago, structural risks, costly systems failing. Do you remember? He showed them to you at Christmas. His brow furrowed just for a moment before he waved a hand dismissively. Dad was always overly cautious. I saw opportunity where he saw problems. And now? I asked, sweeping my gaze over the gutted walls. Silence stretched between us, filled only by the hum of a disconnected light fixture. Finally, he muttered. Things got complicated. I drew a steadying breath. Lucas, meet me tomorrow. At the cottage. No distractions, no arrogance. Just you and me. We need to talk about what comes next. He tilted his head, suspicion narrowing his eyes. What do you mean? What comes next? I mean whether you want help or ruin. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his features. Then his mask slid back into place. Fine. 11 o'clock, but don't pretend you're the one in control here, Mom. I turned toward the door, letting the dust cling to my shoes. Behind me, his words echoed like the growl of a cornered animal. Yet beneath the bluster, I had glimpsed it. The truth Julia hinted at. Lucas was unraveling, caught in a web of debts and pride. And David had left me the tools to confront this moment. As I stepped back into the Atlanta sunlight, I felt the weight of decision settle over me like a mantle. Tomorrow, in Asheville, I would face my son not as the mother he dismissed, but as the guardian of a legacy he could neither claim nor destroy. The morning of our meeting dawned crisp in Asheville, the air sharp with wood smoke from chimneys tucked along the ridge. I woke before dawn, pacing the cottage as though the walls themselves could lend me courage. On the desk in David's study lay the portfolio I had prepared: financial assessments, valuations, even the reports about the penthouse's failing structure. Proof that my husband had seen further than either of us. Proof that I now carried the authority to decide. At precisely 11, Lucas's black SUV pulled into the drive. He stepped out with that same cultivated air, jacket pressed, hair trimmed. But beneath it, I saw what Julia had described, the faint shadows beneath his eyes, the tension in his jaw. He was trying to appear in control, but the cracks showed. Nice place, he said flatly as I ushered him through the kitchen. Dad always had a flair for hiding things, didn't he? I didn't answer. Instead, I led him out to the back patio where I'd set a small table with 2 glasses of iced tea. The garden sloped toward a glimpse of the Blue Ridge, golden in morning light. Neutral ground, I thought. A place where truth might finally be spoken. Before we talk about your situation, I began, sliding the portfolio toward him. I want you to see this. He opened it with a sigh, but as his eyes scanned the first pages, his expression changed. Reports David had commissioned 3 years ago, detailing the very structural problems Lucas now faced. The language was clinical, the projections exact. He knew? Lucas muttered, flipping pages with growing agitation. He tried to warn you, I said softly. Do you remember that Christmas? He showed you these reports at the table. You called them boring, unnecessary. Lucas's mouth tightened. I didn't think... He stopped himself, then shoved the folder aside. If you brought me here just to lecture, I didn't. My voice cut through his. I brought you here to lay out the terms of my help. He blinked, caught off guard. Terms? Yes, if you want my support, financial or otherwise, it won't come without conditions. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. So now you're holding the purse strings? After Dad clearly meant for me to inherit the visible assets? The visible assets, I repeated, steady. But not the real wealth. He left that to me for a reason, and if you want any part of it, you will meet these conditions. His face reddened, but curiosity held him silent. First, I said, ticking the points off on my fingers, total transparency. Every account, every debt, every contract. No hidden liabilities, no half-truths. Second, independent trustees will oversee any funds. You won't touch a dollar directly. Third, you agree to counseling someone who can help you confront the entitlement and recklessness that brought you here. And fourth, I leaned forward, my gaze unflinching. You will make amends for the way you treated me after your father's death. The last point hung in the air like smoke. Lucas's eyes flashed. Amends? What does that even mean? An apology? It means acknowledgement, I said evenly. It means you look me in the eye and admit you cast me out, called me useless, when your father had spent his dying years protecting me. It means you understand that relationships have consequences, just as financial choices do. He shot to his feet, pacing the patio. This is absurd. You're treating me like a child on an allowance. No, I corrected. I'm treating you like a man who has made dangerous decisions and needs guardrails before he destroys everything left to him. He turned, his expression a mask of outrage, but I saw something else beneath it, fear, real, raw fear. This house, those cars, the trust funds, none of it was meant to humiliate you, I said more gently. It was meant to protect me, and perhaps, in time, to help you grow into the man your father believed you could be. Silence stretched. His shoulders rose and fell with heavy breaths. Finally, he muttered, You're serious. As serious as I've ever been. He rubbed a hand across his face, the gesture weary, almost boyish. I need time to think. Take it, I said. But remember, your creditors won't wait. Decisions made in pride and haste brought you here. If you want a future, Lucas, you'll have to choose differently now. He didn't answer. He just grabbed his keys and stalked toward the SUV. At the edge of the drive, he paused, half-turned. For a heartbeat, I thought he might speak something softer, truer. But then he drove away, leaving only dust and silence in his wake. I sat on the patio long after he was gone, staring at the mountains. My heart ached with the weight of it all. David's foresight, Lucas's stubbornness, my own role as judge between them. But beneath the ache was steel. I was no longer the woman he could dismiss as useless. 3 days later, my phone rang while I was pruning roses at the cottage gate. Lucas's name glowed on the screen. For a moment, I considered letting it ring into silence, but something steadier in me pressed accept. I'll do it, he said without preamble. His voice was rough, clipped, like it cost him to say the words. All of it, your conditions, the trustees, the counseling, whatever it takes. I leaned against the fence, the shears trembling in my hand. You're certain? I don't have a choice, he admitted. The contractors are threatening lawsuits, the bank is circling. If I don't accept your terms, I lose everything. He paused. I'm not doing this for you, Mom. I'm doing it to survive. His honesty cut sharper than any pretense of warmth could have. Survival is a start, I said quietly. The weeks that followed blurred into a grind of paperwork, negotiations, and revelations I hadn't braced myself for. The trust David had left me absorbed Lucas's most urgent debts, carefully structured through independent trustees, just as I'd insisted. Every account, every hidden liability spilled out under fluorescent lights in boardrooms and law offices. It was worse than I'd imagined. Loans layered upon loans. Partnerships on shaky ground. Vanity projects, with no hope of profit. When it was all tallied, the penthouse remained his largest asset, but it had become a liability more than a crown jewel. We debated for weeks, sell it or salvage it. At last, the trustees decided. Complete only the critical repairs to stabilize its value, then sell. Better to cut ties than bleed slowly. Lucas fought the decision, of course. That place is my identity, he raged during one meeting, slamming his palm on the table. It's proof of who I am. No, I told him calmly, watching his fury falter. It's proof of what you've lost, chasing appearances. The sale closed 3 months later. Even half-gutted, the penthouse fetched far more than anyone had feared. Enough to satisfy the creditors, enough to reset the board. Lucas walked away, diminished but not ruined. Meanwhile, my own decisions crystallized. I kept the Jaguar E-Type, the one whose dark green had reminded me of secrets yet to be forgiven. Alistair arranged for it to be maintained, though he chuckled when I told him I intended to drive it along the Blue Ridge Parkway. Mr. Hart would have approved, he said. The Ferrari and the Porsche I chose to sell, their proceeds tens of millions, went partly into a new foundation I named after David. The Hart Foundation for Financial Literacy, dedicated to teaching young adults the lessons my son had ignored. Another portion I reserved in trust for any children Lucas might one day have, though I told no one of that decision. And through it all, counseling began to soften the edges of my son. He attended grudgingly at first, sitting stiff in the therapist's chair, arms crossed. But over weeks, something shifted. His tone grew less sharp, his eyes less guarded when he spoke to me. There were no apologies yet, not fully, but there was less venom, less entitlement. Even Julia, his assistant, pulled me aside one afternoon when she delivered documents. "He's different lately," she said cautiously. "Less cruel, more human." I wanted to believe her. One evening, alone in the cottage, I finally opened the velvet pouch from the safe. Inside lay a ring, an eternity band, sapphires, and diamonds, set in simple gold. Tucked beside it was a note in David's handwriting. "For our 45th, a circle without end, to remind you love doesn't stop when breath does." I pressed the ring to my chest, tears soaking the note. David had prepared even for the milestones he would never see. Lucas was not healed, not redeemed, but neither was he lost beyond saving. David had placed the test in my hands, and for the first time, I felt I might have the strength to grade it, not with cruelty, but with clarity. The useless old woman my son had named me was gone. In her place stood a woman with choices, with power, with a future her husband had built brick by brick in silence. Spring crept softly into Asheville, painting the garden in bursts of daffodils and tulips. The mountains shifted from gray to green, the ridges alive again. Nearly 9 months had passed since David's death, and though grief still lingered in quiet corners, it no longer ruled me. I had grown into the cottage, into the rhythms of a life David had prepared with such care. Lucas came once a month now, never without his guarded pride. But the man who stood at my gate was no longer the one who had thrown me out of Atlanta. Counseling had worked small changes into him, like rain softening stone. He still bristled, still resisted, but he listened in ways he never had before. One April afternoon, he arrived carrying a package. His clothes were less immaculate than usual, good fabric, yes, but worn without display. A short beard shadowed his face, softening the angles, making him look, startlingly, like David in his youth. "The penthouse closed last week," he told me over coffee on the porch. The final walkthrough went smoothly. We cleared more than the trustees expected. "That's good news," I said. He hesitated, then added, "I've been offered a position with a nonprofit in Charleston, community development, affordable housing projects." I blinked. Lucas, who once measured worth in penthouse square footage, speaking of affordable housing, "What made you consider it?" He looked toward the mountains, jaw working. "That project I lost? The luxury condos? The site was sold at bankruptcy auction to a nonprofit. They're building mixed-income housing there now. I've been consulting with them, and..." He exhaled, almost sheepish. "It feels meaningful, using what I know for something other than profit margins." For the first time in years, I heard sincerity in his voice. He reached for the package, sliding it across the table. "I found this while clearing the penthouse. Thought you should have it." Inside was a small wooden box I recognized instantly, David's cufflink collection. Nestled beneath it was a velvet pouch, different from the one in the safe. I opened it carefully, my breath catching. Inside lay my original wedding band, long thought lost. Alongside it, a jeweler's receipt dated just weeks before David's final hospitalization, an eternity band he had ordered for our 45th anniversary. Lucas handed me a smaller box. Inside glittered the finished ring. sapphires and diamonds set with simple elegance. David's last gift. I slid it onto my finger beside the plain gold band. The two rings shone together in the spring light, a symbol of beginnings and completions intertwined. My throat tightened, but I smiled through tears. He was still planning for me, I whispered. Lucas didn't look away. His eyes, for once, held respect. He was always planning, he said quietly. Later, as he left, he paused at the garden gate. What about the cars? He asked, almost casually. I'll keep the Jaguar, I told him. The others are sold. The proceeds will fund a foundation for financial literacy and a trust for your children if you have any one day. He gave a short, thoughtful nod. Children? Maybe someday. When his SUV disappeared down the lane, I walked back inside and touched the letter David had left me, still safe in its envelope. He had been right about so much. About Lucas, about wealth, about love. That evening, I drove the Jaguar along the Blue Ridge Parkway. The engine purred beneath me, the wind lifted my hair, and the sun melted into molten gold over the ridges. My hand on the wheel glittered with both bands, one plain, one jeweled, two halves of the same story. You were right, I whispered to the memory of David, about everything. The cottage by the mountains awaited me at the end of the road, no longer just his gift, but my home. The warehouse on the Mississippi, once mocked as worthless, had unlocked not only my independence, but my strength. Lucas's test was ongoing. Mine too. But as the road curled ahead and the horizon blazed with possibility, I knew this much. I was not a useless old woman. I was a woman reborn.